A doctor rushing to save a dying patient. A police officer determined to stop him. And one moment on a dark highway that will expose truth, power, and the price of being black in America. Tonight, only two men stand on this road. One trying to save a life. One trying to destroy one. And by sunrise, the world will know who they really are. This is the moment. Everything fell apart. Atlanta's December night was merciless. The streets were slick with rain that refused to stop, reflecting neon signs like fractured mirrors. Julian Hayes' Mercedes hummed quietly as he left Grady Memorial, the city's heartbeat vibrating through his tires. He pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders. Even with his medical prestige, Atlanta's cold could humble anyone. His phone buzzed. The alert was urgent. A 54-year-old woman, massive coronary dissection, coding. Julian's hands tightened on the wheel. He knew every second counted. He had performed surgeries with hearts beating on the edge of life before, but the adrenaline rushing now was different. It was personal. Julian's mind raced as he navigated narrow streets. The smell of fried chicken and street-side coffee trucks mixed with wet asphalt. Sirens wailed in the distance. The city was alive, indifferent, and dangerous. The neon glow of gas stations and corner stores painted the faces of pedestrians in harsh colors. A man in a hoodie sprinted across the street, his breath visible in the cold air, clutching a backpack like it contained his whole life. Then, flashing lights erupted behind him, red and blue. Julian's stomach dropped. He slowed, keeping calm. Hands raised, credentials in clear view. "I'm a doctor! Emergency patient in the hospital!" His voice trembled slightly. Fear wasn't for himself but for the life he carried. Officer Garrett Brennan stepped forward, flashlights slicing the darkness. His gaze swept Julian's expensive car, then Julian himself, a silent judgment forming. "Nice car," he said, the words dripping with condescension. "Doesn't change the law." Julian's pulse quickened. The seconds became tangible, each one heavier than the last. He thought of Margaret, the patient, lying helplessly, monitors beeping in his imagination. "Please," he urged. "She's coding. I need to get her to the OR." Brennan's smirk remained, ignoring the hospital badge. Another officer, Walsh, looked uncertain, sensing the injustice but hesitant to intervene. Julian felt the old, familiar sting of being underestimated, not for the first time, not in a city that questioned the color of his skin more than the skill in his hands. Flashbacks hit him. Years ago, a similar encounter in a hospital parking lot, being doubted in a conference room, colleagues assuming he didn't belong. Rage and fear collided, forming a knot in his chest. He forced calmness over it, professionalism as armor. Nearby, a passerby filmed the interaction on their phone. Julian could see the glow of the screen catching the tension, the Mercedes, flashing lights, raised hands, the officer's cold stance. Social media would decide the narrative before anyone knew the truth. Time stretched. Julian felt trapped in a nightmare where the only outcome was either life or death, but he couldn't control the other people in this story. He watched Brennan's eyes, calculating, skeptical, unwilling to trust even a life-or-death emergency. Finally, Julian forced his voice to edge into authority. "Captain Shaw is on call. If you don't let me pass, I'll escalate." Brennan hesitated, glancing toward Walsh, who simply shrugged, powerless under peer pressure. Julian knew the night could tip either way, a microcosm of the systemic injustices embedded in the city's core. Brennan finally backed off slightly, and Julian's Mercedes roared forward, tires slicing through puddles. The city passed by like a blurred painting, brick buildings dripping with rain, dim streetlights reflecting graffiti and posters demanding justice, subway entrances echoing distant footsteps. Julian's mind was only on the hospital, only on Margaret. Every heartbeat, every second, a drum reminding him of what was at stake. He pulled into the emergency entrance of Grady Memorial, doors swinging open to the chaos inside, nurses rushing, alarms blaring, monitors beeping. Julian sprinted through the hallway, scrubs flapping, heart pounding in rhythm with every life-saving step. In the OR, every motion became deliberate, precise. The patient's vitals flickered dangerously, and Julian's focus tunneled into a singular point, saving her life. He had no time for the tension, no room for prejudice, only skill, only instinct, only humanity. As he scrubbed in and the team prepared, Julian allowed himself one moment to notice the city outside, the streets he fought through, the inequalities that almost robbed him of precious seconds, and he silently vowed that this wouldn't be the last battle for justice. The fluorescent lights of Grady Memorial were harsh, casting stark shadows across Julian's face. The operating room had emptied, leaving only the echoes of machines and the low hum of fluorescent bulbs. Margaret's vitals were stable, her life saved, but Julian's mind didn't find relief. Outside, Atlanta's streets had returned to their indifferent rhythm, the rain softening into mist, streetlights glimmering like scattered stars on asphalt. Julian stepped out into the early morning, coat drenched, hair plastered, hands trembling not from cold but from adrenaline and the lingering weight of the encounter. His Mercedes glistened under the streetlights, a symbol of success overshadowed by systemic friction. He thought of the officer, Brennan, the subtle arrogance, the disbelief, the cold authority that could have cost a life. The city around him seemed alive in its contradictions. Downtown was emptying after the night shift. Corner stores opened with the scent of hot coffee and fried pastries. The graffiti on walls told stories of decades-long struggle, murals of civil rights leaders looking down, demanding accountability. A bus rolled by, passengers staring out at rain-soaked streets, each with their own private battles. Julian walked slowly, letting the city's pulse sync with his own heartbeat, the storm outside reflecting the turmoil within. At home, Julian's apartment was small but meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the chaotic streets. He dropped his keys and coat, replaying the encounter over and over. Each moment in the parking lot, each pause from Brennan, each hesitant glance from Officer Walsh, he remembered it all in excruciating detail. The anger simmered beneath the surface, tempered by the exhaustion of life-saving work. Julian knew the social media video captured by the bystander would surface. Already, he could imagine the narrative. Doctor versus cop, white officer stops black doctor saving life, systemic injustice caught on camera. He felt the familiar knot in his chest, the mixture of fear, frustration, and resolve. This city, this culture, demanded vigilance even in life-or-death moments. The next morning, Julian found himself back on the streets, not in a Mercedes, but walking, observing. The people around him were real, struggling, resilient. He passed a corner with teenagers skateboarding, spray paint cans in their backpacks, music pulsing from an old boombox. A woman yelled across the street to a friend, laughing, despite the cold. The city breathed with stories, each individual a microcosm of struggle and hope. News alerts began to flood his phone. The video of the encounter had gone viral, sparking outrage. Comments streamed in, some praising him, others questioning the narrative, a few injecting vitriol. Julian scrolled silently, absorbing the spectrum of reactions. The tension in the streets was mirrored online. Justice was no longer just a hospital matter, it was public, communal, demanding reckoning. That evening, Julian received a call from Captain Shaw. The conversation was professional but tense. "We're reviewing the incident," Shaw said cautiously. "But you need to be careful. This is bigger than us now." Julian listened, nodding even though Shaw couldn't see him. Every word reinforced the truth he already knew. The fight for justice was never straightforward, and sometimes, saving a life was only the first battle. The city's rhythm pulsed outside, streetlights flickered, sirens echoed faintly, and the distant rumble of trains vibrated through the concrete canyons. Julian looked out his window, thinking of Margaret recovering in her hospital room, thinking of the people who couldn't access care as easily, thinking of the officers who carried authority without empathy. He clenched his fists, a silent promise forming, he would not let this go unnoticed. Meanwhile, Brennan's name was trending. The public's attention had shifted, but the stakes were higher. Julian's friends, colleagues, and patients began calling, offering support and warning. The tension of the city mirrored his own internal storm, a slow burn fire fueled by the need for accountability. The streets of Atlanta were alive, watching, judging, waiting. Julian walked through the misty streets late at night, sneakers tapping softly against the wet asphalt, the neon signs reflecting on puddles like shards of broken glass. He passed murals demanding justice, storefronts with boarded-up windows, and people huddled under umbrellas, faces hidden but expressions clear. Each corner, each alley, reminded him of the stories behind every headline, every viral clip. By the end of Part 2, Julian wasn't just a doctor, he was a witness, a participant in a city grappling with power, race, and responsibility. The tension was palpable. The slow build of narrative, character depth, and environment left readers on the edge, primed for the next phase of the story: confrontation, exposure, and the fight for justice in its rawest form. The next morning, Atlanta woke to a city buzzing with outrage. The viral video of the encounter had exploded across social media, news outlets scrambling to cover the story. Julian sat at his kitchen table, coffee cooling in a mug he hadn't touched, scrolling through a feed filled with anger, praise, and debate. Headlines screamed, "Black doctor stopped by officer while saving life. Viral video sparks outrage." The city, already tense, felt like it was holding its breath. Julian's phone rang incessantly. Margaret's family, colleagues, friends, all offering support, concern, and advice. Yet it was the call from Tanya, a journalist with deep roots in Atlanta's communities, that made his chest tighten. "Julian, we need your side," she said, voice steady but urgent. "People need to see the truth. You can't stay silent." He hesitated. Public exposure was dangerous, unpredictable. Yet silence felt like complicity. He knew this was more than his story. It was every life affected by prejudice, every unrecorded moment of injustice. Meanwhile, Officer Brennan returned to the precinct, unaware that the world was watching. His superiors whispered, worried about internal investigations and public scrutiny. Julian's viral presence forced confrontation, both institutional and personal. Brennan's colleagues avoided him, tension crackling through the air. The weight of accountability pressed on him, but arrogance lingered like a shield. Julian didn't wait for permission. He walked the streets, observing, noting details for an interview with Tanya. Atlanta's sidewalks were alive, street vendors opening their stalls, kids darting between puddles, murals reflecting the city's history of resistance. He recognized every nuance: the way residents eyed police cars cautiously, the murals of civil rights leaders staring down, the subtle signs of resilience in every passerby. When the interview aired, Julian's voice carried over the airwaves with a calm authority, recounting the event factually, emotionally, and unapologetically. His words painted the scene: the tension in the parking lot, the hesitation from Officer Brennan, the potential tragedy that had been narrowly averted. Viewers could feel the storm, both outside and within him. The city erupted in response. Protests, peaceful yet charged, formed near the precinct and hospital. People carried signs demanding justice, accountability now. Black lives matter. Every life matters. Julian stood among them briefly, his presence a quiet but powerful affirmation. The streets were no longer mere asphalt. They were a stage for reckoning. Officer Brennan, forced into the spotlight, faced an internal affairs investigation. Julian's story, coupled with the video, left little room for denial. The tension reached its peak during a tense public hearing. Brennan sat rigid, glancing at Julian, avoiding eye contact. Julian recounted the incident once more, calmly, yet with a gravity that made every observer lean in. He didn't shout, he didn't plead. He simply narrated the truth, letting facts and emotion carry the weight. The hearing ended, but the confrontation continued in subtle ways. Brennan's demeanor had shifted, the arrogance tempered by scrutiny. Julian knew this was only the beginning. Justice was slow, deliberate, sometimes messy. Yet the seed had been planted. The streets, the public, and the system itself were now aware. Julian walked out into the misty evening, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, feeling the pulse of Atlanta beneath his feet. In that moment, he realized that confrontation wasn't just about holding one officer accountable. it was about awakening awareness, inspiring change, and demanding vigilance. Every step he took resonated with purpose, every shadowed alley a reminder of lives unseen, stories untold, struggles ongoing. By the end of Part 3, Julian had become more than a witness, he was a symbol, a catalyst. The tension was alive, the stakes higher, and the slow burn journey toward justice set for its final, cinematic act. The sun barely pierced through the thick Atlanta morning fog, casting muted light over streets still buzzing with the echoes of protest. Julian walked toward the courthouse, each step deliberate, the wet pavement reflecting the muted neon signs of convenience stores and murals of civil rights icons. Today wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. Inside the courthouse, the room was tense, electric. Families, journalists, activists, and community leaders filled the seats, all waiting for one truth to be recognized. Julian's heart thumped, but he held himself steady. He had rehearsed nothing. This was real, raw, and unavoidable. Officer Brennan entered last, the arrogance he once wore like armor now noticeably cracked. The weight of public scrutiny pressed on him. The murmurs in the room were deafening, yet Julian remained calm, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Every eye followed him as he stepped forward. The proceedings began. Julian recounted the encounter, describing each moment in meticulous detail. The hesitant draw of the officer's weapon, the subtle gestures of panic, and the courage it had taken to remain composed while facing potential danger. His words were deliberate, measured, yet dripping with emotion. Every pause, every subtle inflection, told the story the video alone could not. Outside, the city waited. Social media feeds erupted with updates, hashtags trending, hashtag justice for Julian, hashtag accountability matters, hashtag Atlanta stands. The streets, once simmering with anger, now vibrated with hope. Local activists spoke to crowds, emphasizing the importance of every citizen's voice and every recorded moment of truth. Back in the courtroom, witnesses corroborated Julian's account. Community members, hospital staff, and bystanders who had seen the encounter added their testimony. The narrative was clear, undeniable. Officer Brennan's defense faltered under the weight of evidence and collective scrutiny. When the ruling came, it was swift yet symbolic. Brennan was held accountable, reassigned, and mandated to undergo extensive bias and de-escalation training. The court emphasized systemic reform, not just individual punishment. Julian exhaled, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over him. The city's slow-burn justice had finally taken a tangible step forward. Outside, Julian was greeted by the cheers of supporters. Children waved handmade signs, parents nodded respectfully, and journalists snapped photos capturing the moment. He looked around at the streets he had walked countless times, the murals, the corners, the familiar asphalt, and felt the weight of what had just unfolded. It wasn't just personal justice, it was communal, symbolic, transformative. Later, Julian returned to his clinic, the world outside seemingly normal, yet subtly shifted. Patients came with renewed hope, colleagues with admiration, and strangers offered quiet nods of gratitude. Every interaction carried the undercurrent of change, proof that courage and truth could ripple outward, impacting lives in ways unseen. That evening, as Julian stood on the balcony of his modest apartment, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, he reflected on the journey. Fear had been a constant companion, tension a daily shadow, yet perseverance, truth, and resilience had guided him to this moment. He knew the fight wasn't over, systemic change never ends, but today, justice had spoken, and the streets of Atlanta, with all their grit and heart, had witnessed it. Julian's gaze lingered on the murals across the street. Faces of leaders who had long fought for equality stared back. He felt connected, part of a lineage of those who refused silence, those who demanded accountability. The slow burn of tension had reached its climax, emotions raw yet cathartic, and a city had learned, in its own streets and hearts, the power of truth. In the quiet aftermath, Julian knew the story wasn't just his, it was everyone's. Every voice mattered, every action counted, and every recorded moment could tilt the scales toward justice. He had faced fear, confrontation, and uncertainty, but in doing so, he became more than a witness, he became a symbol of hope, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Did this story touch your heart? Subscribe now and join our journey bringing real voices and untold stories to light. Comment your thoughts, your voice matters.